Today I have a pretty cool guitar to review, and not only is it a pretty cool guitar, but it actually is a vintage 60s Fender guitar, which makes it even more than pretty cool in my opinion. I haven't owned too many 60s Fenders, maybe, just a handful, but every time I do find one, I do get excited because at the end of the day, it's a 50-year-old Fender, and that puts it in the true vintage guitar category in my opinion. So today I have a 12-string Fender from 1967. The model name of this guitar is the Fender Coronado XII. In other words, the Coronado 12. So obviously from first glance you can tell that this is not a standard 6-string guitar. This is actually a 12-string electric guitar, and you can tell by the headstock shape, the headstock design. This is a very unique looking headstock design. Not the typical Fender headstock design, mainly because of the 12 strings. They had to enlarge it, make it a little bit longer or a lot longer, and then make it this interesting looking hockey puck or hockey stick type of headstock design, which I thought was pretty unique and pretty cool. So for me personally, I have heard the Fender Coronado. I actually didn't know that they had a 12-string model, but I do know a late 60s Fender Coronado in Antigua finish and also the Wildwood finish. It was like a walnut color, and I forget the exact wood that they used. It's not even real wood from what I've read. It's like some kind of beech wood. They like injected some dye in it. I remember that specific Fender Coronado was on the market for a while, and I was doing some negotiations with the seller, but we could never come up to a deal, so I never got it. So first impression, when I saw this guitar in person, this is actually a very light guitar in my opinion. I actually thought that this was a semi-hollow, but after looking inside the sound hole, this F hole, you can't really see it. I can't really see it either because the F holes are just too small, but this is actually a completely hollow body guitar, and because of that fact, it's a pretty light guitar in my opinion. I'd say maybe 6 pounds, 7 pounds, around that range. For me, when the seller showed me this guitar and it was like this in his car, I expected 9 pounds or 10 pounds, but when I picked it up and I was like, whoa, this is super light. That's the first thing I told him. I said exactly that. Dude, this is hella light guitar, and indeed it is. So because of that, even though I prefer a heavier guitar, because for me personally, I feel like if a guitar just has a certain weight to it, it just feels more sturdy to me. It's just personal preference. Because this guitar is pretty light, I'd say it's a very good and comfortable guitar to gig with, especially for standing up. I actually played around with this guitar with a strap standing up for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, which I never do. I always play sitting down. During those 30 to 40 minutes that I played, I had no issues with the comfort. It was actually perfectly fine. So I feel like slowly I am appreciating the value of a lighter guitar. It just makes it much easier to play, especially on your back. Doesn't put too much strain. Another very cool feature of this guitar that I love, and I love this for any guitar, it's just this block pearl inlays, especially on the first fret. Kind of reminds me of a Gibson Les Paul Custom or a Gibson ES355 style block inlays. Those higher end electric guitars where they put the block inlays on the first fret rather than just starting from the 3rd fret. I thought it gave a very elegant and luxurious feel to a relatively affordable, vintage 60s Fender guitar. 60s Fender Strat, 60s Fender Tellies, they're pretty expensive. For this particular model, the Coronado 12 for the 60s, you can get this for under 2 grand, 2.5 maybe if it's in really good condition, but definitely not a bank buster, a bank breaker when it comes to the vintage Fender guitars. So that's a very nice plus. Apart from the block inlays, this design overall really reminds me of, the Gibson ES335 style model. Obviously the body is not exactly one for one for the ES335, but you can definitely see the influence of that ES335 for this Coronado series. 3-way toggle switch right here on the bottom, 4 knobs, 2 tone, 2 volume. And these types of knobs I actually really like. Very cool. I think it's a very unique style of knobs. Definitely doesn't give you the Stratocaster, Telecaster style. Just a completely own unique style knobs, which I do enjoy. You got two original Fender pickups. Very interesting sounds, very nice sounds with these guitars you can produce. Even though for Fender guitars, I feel like the bridge pickup is usually the highlight. For this, it was actually the middle and the neck. I don't know, something about this neck pickup, especially if I played some, you know, Hotel California on this guitar, dude, it sounded pretty damn good. I don't know what they did with these pickups, but the quality of the tone of these pickups do sound very good. I agree. Vintage style Fender Tuners. These actually remind me of the 70s style Fender Tuners, but this is from the late 60s, so I don't know if late 60s Fenders also use the same tuning styles as, you know, the 70 Fender guitars that I've owned. I've owned way more 70s than 60s Fenders, so I can't really say what's what. But regardless, the quality of these tuners are high. And honestly, I really do like this design of the pegs much more than, you know, the current standard, American standard tuners. The 60s and the 70s style tuners of Fenders, the pegs are shaped a little bit different. It's not a completely circle shape. It's not a completely square shape. It's like a, I don't even know what shape this is called, maybe a hexagon, but very unique shape, and I do like these very much. One thing I will say for this guitar is this is not an easy guitar to play at all, and one of the main reasons is because this guitar is not set up properly. So the last owner put on brand new strings, but because this isn't set up, the action is actually still very, very high. Even for me, this is very high. I always say in some of my other videos, you know, I don't really care too much for action, but this action is just not a standard action you can play on comfortably. This is in fact much higher than what a slide guitarist action would be like. Let me try to show you how high this is, if you can even see it. I don't know if you could see it, but it's pretty damn high. So because of that, it's pretty hard for me to play even like a standard chord. And another reason why this guitar is pretty hard to play is because the nut width is actually pretty small. It's pretty small and short. So this nut width is actually the same nut width I feel like for a 6-string guitar. Maybe even smaller for a 6-string. So imagine like, you know, your standard 6-string electric guitar that you have, but putting an extra layer of 6 additional strings on top of the other 6 strings you got, and combine that with my hands, which are pretty big. This is just a really hard guitar to play. So if you have smaller hands, smaller fingers, you know, this guitar will probably be much easier for you to play the guitar. But if you have bigger hands, you will have some difficulty, but it's not, you know, impossible. You know, I feel like the more and more I played this guitar, easier and easier it got. So maybe it's just my lack of experience with the 12-string guitar. Even though it was harder to play, the tone was so good, especially if you pair this with an amp, with a tube amp, with a Fender Princeton reverb. Man, some of the tones this can produce is just, it makes me kind of not want to sell this guitar. That's how good the tones were. So overall, in my opinion, I think it's a very good sounding guitar. If I had to give a rating for this particular guitar, tone, I'd give this a 8.5 out of 10. Very good sounding guitar. Doesn't sound like a traditional Strat or a Tele or any other guitar, obviously because it's a 12 string, but still, I've played a handful of 12 strings elsewhere, you know, guitar centers and whatnot, and I've owned a couple 12 strings too, but this is actually the first electric 12 string guitar I've ever owned, let alone a vintage electric 12 string by Fender from the 60s. So because of that, I feel like it adds a lot of cool mojo and vibes to it, and the tone does sound good in my opinion. Build quality, I'll probably give this a 8 out of 10, but to be even more specific, I'll probably give this like a 7.8 out of 10. And mainly it's because since this guitar is a completely hollow body, it just doesn't give me this firm, you know, the firmness of the quality of the structure. Like my ES340, you know, I don't have it with me right now, but if you pick that up, immediately you're like, damn dude, this is a heavy quality piece of wood. But since this is hollow, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I feel like if I bumped it somewhere really hard or somewhat hard, it may leave some, you know, pretty significant damage to the body and wood. Even the headstock quality, you know, even though it is good quality overall, this isn't standard, you know, Fender wood quality in my experience. So if I compared this 60s Fender headstock quality to, like, you know, my 90s made in Mexico Stratocaster headstock, the 90s made in Mexico headstock quality, the wood quality in my opinion is just more stable than this. And like I said, I don't know how true that is, but that's just the feeling I'm getting. But that doesn't mean that this guitar is bad. It doesn't mean that this guitar is flimsy. I'm just saying that this particular Coronado hollow body 12 string guitar is not the highest quality build Fender that I've ever seen on a Fender guitar. But still, at the end of the day, it still is a vintage 60s Fender guitar, let alone a very unique one, a 12 stringer. So in my opinion, that reason alone is good enough for me to buy this guitar and appreciate this guitar, because it's just a cool looking guitar overall.